The studio lights were blinding. The cameras were live. Every major global network was tuned in. CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC. Even local stations from Ouagadougou to Cape Town. The show was called The Future of Africa, and the special guest was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest African leader in decades. Calm, focused, loved by his people. Sitting across from him was a surprise guest, U.S. President Donald J. Trump. What was supposed to be a panel about African development had quickly turned into something far bigger, something none of the producers had warned Traoré about. Trump smiled widely. His voice boomed. "We have a deal for you, Captain. $7 billion. Factories, highways, power grids, all yours. But we need access. Full access." The crowd clapped. Some gasped. The host's eyes widened. Traoré didn't move. His face didn't twitch, not even a blink. Instead, he calmly reached for his earpiece. He looked down, then looked back at Trump. His silence filled the room. And then, softly, he leaned forward. What he said next would set the entire planet on fire. But not yet. First, you must understand what led to this moment. A week before the broadcast, a hand-delivered letter arrived at Traoré's desk in Ouagadougou. It came from a tiny village, Toma. No electricity, no water, just dust, hope, and resilience. The letter wasn't written by a mayor or a chief. It was from a 9-year-old girl named Soumaya. She wrote with trembling hands, "Dear Captain Traoré, my little brother is very sick. We don't have medicine. Mama says we will wait for rainwater again. I want to go to school, but our roof is gone. I'm scared. Please help." Soumaya had drawn a tiny heart under her name. Traoré paused. He set the letter down. His chest rose slowly. He had already seen 100 letters like this before. But this one felt like a scream from the soul of his nation. That night, he made a vow. No foreign handshake would ever mean more than a child's cry. Back in the studio, across from Trump, that vow burned in his heart like fire. He was ready now. He just needed the world to listen. Back in the studio, the world was watching. Live. Trump laid out his $7 billion offer with dramatic flair. "Energy plants, roads, internet, you name it," he said. "Burkina Faso will be rich." The host leaned in, smiling nervously. The audience nodded, but Traoré's face stayed frozen. Calm. Cold even. He glanced at the papers Trump slid across the table. Fine print. Legal traps. Silent conditions. One line stood out. Exclusive mining and security access granted to external partner entities. In simple words, they wanted the gold, the land, the control. This wasn't a gift, it was a leash. And suddenly, Soumaya's face flashed in his mind. Her thin arms, her cracked lips, her courage to still write a letter. Trump waited. So did the world. Traoré slowly closed the folder, pushed it back, and leaned forward. He whispered something. 9 words. The host froze. Trump blinked. Gasps rippled through the studio. Phones came out. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers watching at home dropped their forks. The room felt like it couldn't breathe. Time froze. Trump leaned back, confused. The host blinked, waiting for Traoré to laugh or at least explain, but he didn't. He simply stared, still, steady, strong. A silence hung in the air that felt ancient. The kind of silence you hear just before thunder breaks the sky. In the control room, producers waved frantically. "Zoom in on him! Zoom in!" someone shouted. Phones in the audience were now all up, recording. A young woman on Twitter would later caption the clip, "This isn't just a man saying no, it's an entire continent breathing." But in that moment, the people in the studio didn't know what to think. Why would any leader turn down $7 billion? Why did it feel like something bigger was happening? And most importantly, what were those 9 words he had just whispered? Traoré hadn't said them to the room. He had said them to Trump. Low, calm, chilling. The host finally gathered courage. "Captain Traoré, could you repeat what you just said for the viewers?" Traoré slowly turned his head. His eyes looked like they'd seen war, hunger, betrayal. "Are you sure your viewers are ready?" he asked. Before he spoke again, Traoré took a deep breath. And in that moment, he wasn't in a studio. He was back in Gascinde, a northern town scarred by terror. He remembered the crying of a mother, wailing over her lifeless son, who had died carrying a sack of donated rice miles through the bush. There had been no ambulance, no military protection, just dust, tears, and silence. The boy's name was Abdul, 11 years old. That was the day Traoré, then still a soldier, realized aid without dignity is not help, it's slow death. Trump didn't know Abdul. The cameras didn't see him. But Traoré did. So when he stared at Trump again, it was with the eyes of millions of forgotten children. He repeated his words, this time for the world. "I do not trade souls for cement and gold." Gasps rippled. The translator froze, then slowly spoke the sentence aloud in English. Mouths dropped. On social media, people were weeping. Screenshots spread like wildfire. The hashtag "not for sale" trended in 41 countries within minutes. But what came next? That would turn Traoré's whisper into a global thunderclap. Moments after Traoré spoke the now viral 9 words, Trump laughed awkwardly. "Come on, Captain, let's not get emotional." But Traoré didn't flinch. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a USB stick. The studio lights reflected off it like a blade. "You offered me a deal," he said. "But you didn't expect me to read the fine print, did you?" The host leaned forward. "What's on the USB?" Traoré handed it to the assistant producer. "Read it live. Let the people hear what they were never meant to." The producer hesitated, then obeyed. A contract appeared on the screen. Not the one on the table. A classified draft, dated 3 months earlier. It showed U.S. control over 4 gold mines, a 40-year military installation lease, a clause banning any African nation from inspecting the supply chains, and the worst, a line stating Burkina Faso would become a strategic dependent region. The crowd gasped. The host stammered. Trump's face changed, and across the world, people began to understand. This wasn't a deal. This was a disguised conquest. As the world watched the live broadcast unfold, a message was quietly spreading deep within Burkina Faso. Soumaya, the brave 9-year-old from Toma, had become a symbol. Her letter, once fragile and trembling, was now being read aloud in every village, every city. Across the nation, mothers whispered her words to their children, and fathers clenched their fists in silent prayer. Traoré's refusal wasn't just about money. It was about hope. Hope for children like Soumaya, who deserved more than empty promises. His defiant 9 words, "I do not trade souls for cement and gold," became a rallying cry. At a small school in Ouagadougou, a teacher wiped away tears as she told her students, "One man spoke for all of us. One man said no." Meanwhile, social media exploded. Across Africa and the world, people shared their own stories of sacrifice and resilience. The hashtag "not for sale" was no longer just a trend, it was a movement. And in that movement, Traoré was no longer just a leader. He was the voice of millions whose voices had been ignored for too long. Back in the studio, the atmosphere had changed. Trump's confident smile faded into a tight line. His advisors whispered urgently into his ear. The world was watching and judging. The $7 billion offer had become a test of wills. The host, trying to steer the conversation, asked, "Captain Traoré, don't you worry about the future, about development and progress?" Traoré's eyes glimmered with quiet strength. He answered slowly. Progress built on chains is still slavery. The room fell silent again. But behind the scenes, pressure was mounting on Traoré. Diplomats from several countries called. All wanted to know, would he reconsider? Would he accept the deal? But Traoré knew that accepting would mean surrendering his people's dignity. He thought of Abdul, the boy who died carrying rice. He thought of Sumaya's letter, and he knew some fights were bigger than money. As the broadcast ended, the world didn't forget. News anchors replayed the moment over and over. Analysts debated whether Traoré's words were bold or reckless. But for everyday people, especially across Africa, the reaction was clear. This was a moment of truth. In Dakar, Senegal, a young activist shouted to a crowd, "He stood for us, for our dignity." In Johannesburg, South Africa, an elderly woman wept as she watched. Finally, someone says no to those who think we're weak. Even governments began to feel the shift. Leaders sent private messages to Traoré. Some applauded his courage, others warned him of consequences. But Traoré remained calm, because he knew the battle was far from over. His words had shaken the world, but now it was time to turn that shock into change. After the broadcast, Traoré returned to his office in Ouagadougou. The room was quiet but heavy with expectation. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from citizens, leaders, even strangers from distant lands. A young mother's voice message played softly. "Captain, my children finally sleep without fear tonight." That was the moment he felt the full weight of his decision. He wasn't just a man refusing money. He was a symbol of hope for millions who had been ignored. Outside, children played under a setting sun, unaware their futures were being fought for in a studio thousands of miles away. Traoré thought of Sumaya and Abdul again, their faces etched into his heart. "I must not fail them," he whispered. His refusal wasn't an end, it was a beginning. A message that Africa's dignity cannot be sold or bargained away. Within hours, the clip of Traoré's 9 words exploded across social media. News channels replayed it endlessly. Analysts called it a turning point. In homes from Lagos to London, people wept openly, moved by a leader who spoke for the forgotten. African leaders quietly reached out. Some expressed solidarity, inspired by Traoré's courage. Others worried about the risks he was taking. But in the hearts of ordinary people, something had shifted. The idea that Africa's future could be shaped by its own leaders, not outsiders, was no longer just a dream. It was becoming reality. But courage comes with risks. The morning after the broadcast, anonymous warnings arrived. Diplomatic cables leaked warnings of economic pressure and covert attempts to isolate Burkina Faso. Yet Traoré remained unmoved. He gathered his closest advisors. "We will protect our people with our truth," he said quietly. His strength was not born from fearlessness, but from love for his nation. He knew that standing for dignity sometimes meant standing alone. But he also knew that true leadership was tested in these shadows, and his people were watching. Word of Traoré's refusal spread like wildfire. In every corner of Burkina Faso, people poured into the streets, not in protest, but in celebration. Children sang songs of hope. Women raised banners that read, "Dignity first." Elders nodded quietly, tears shining in their eyes. At the center of Ouagadougou, a massive crowd gathered to show their support. The air was thick with emotion, pride, relief, and a renewed sense of unity. Traoré stood before them, not as a distant leader on a screen, but as one of their own. He spoke softly, but every word echoed in the hearts of the crowd. "This is not just my fight. It is ours." The people listened, some clutching photographs of lost loved ones, others holding hands with children who deserved better futures. This was a moment of healing, a moment where a nation chose dignity over dollars. Behind the scenes, not everyone was alone. African leaders began reaching out in secret, sharing messages of support and plans to strengthen continental unity. In Addis Ababa, meetings were held to discuss how to protect their shared sovereignty. Traoré's bravery inspired a wave of quiet resistance to external pressures. The world was watching and slowly shifting. A respected elder told Traoré, "You are lighting a fire that cannot be put out." Though dangers loomed, the solidarity of a continent gave him strength. Every handshake he refused was a step toward freedom. Every word spoken was a promise to future generations. But power resists change. The threats grew louder. Economic sanctions whispered in diplomatic halls. Aid was delayed. Trade agreements froze. Yet, through it all, Traoré remained unshaken. His people depended on his resolve. One night, he visited the poorest neighborhood of Ouagadougou. Children played under flickering streetlights. Mothers shared meals by candlelight. Traoré knelt, touched the dusty ground, and whispered, "I will never abandon you." This was no longer just politics. It was a sacred vow, a promise written in the hearts of every citizen. The night was quiet, but inside Traoré's heart, a storm brewed. He sat alone in his modest office, surrounded by maps and letters from his people. A candle flickered softly. Outside, the city of Ouagadougou slept, unaware of the decisions that would shape their future. Traoré thought of Soumaya, the little girl whose letter had changed everything. He whispered a silent prayer for every child who slept hungry, afraid, or forgotten. Tomorrow would bring challenges no one could predict. But he knew one thing clearly: dignity is worth every sacrifice. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders. He was no longer just a leader. He was a guardian of hope. The next day, Traoré stood again before the cameras. This time, he spoke not just to Trump or the world's leaders, but to every citizen who believed in a future free from control. His voice was steady, filled with quiet power. "We will build our future, not on borrowed promises, but on our own courage and unity." Across Africa, families gathered around radios and screens, tears streaming down their faces. In that moment, Traoré became more than a man. He became a symbol of resilience, pride, and love. Even those who had doubted now believed, because he had said what many could not. Years later, as the sun set over Burkina Faso, children played under skies filled with hope. The roads were rough but filled with life. Mothers smiled as their children went to school without fear. Traoré stood quietly, watching from a distance. He knew the fight was far from over, but he also knew this: true strength is found when you refuse to sell your soul. His 9 words had shaken the world, but more importantly, they had ignited a fire that would burn for generations. Dear viewers, if this story moved you as deeply as it moved me, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this, and share your thoughts below. Your comments keep this fire alive. Tell me, which moment touched you the most? What gives you hope? Together, we can spread strength, courage, and dignity worldwide. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey.